Hey again everyone, and welcome back to another video. As promised, today we'll be taking a look at another movie custom that I've done. This time we'll actually be looking at two customs that I've replicated from the 1971 movie Duel. That being my 1/64 scale 1955 Peterbilt 281 with tanker trailer and my 1/64 scale 1970 Plymouth Valiant. And these two customs are very special to me just because of all the work that went into these. It was not just a simple repaint and add some parts with these vehicles. There was a lot that had to be done. And I'll go ahead and show you what all I had to do to achieve this look on both. Now there's a bit of a backstory as to why I decided to make these customs. And it's been quite a few years back now, but there was one evening, a friend of mine and we were discussing trucker movies like Smokey and the Bandit, Convoy, BJ and the Bear, etc. And he brought up the movie Duel. Now, up until this point, I had never even heard of Duel, and I was actually able to go online and find the entire movie. And of course, this was back when you could still find movies for free online. I think a lot of streaming services have started cracking down on those sites. But after watching Duel, I really wanted to have a 1/64 scale replica of the truck from that movie, and at this time I had no intentions of making the Valiant. I just wanted the truck. But I really enjoyed Duel, and I liked it so much I even went out and bought the collector's edition DVD of the movie, and this actually has a bit of a behind-the-scenes look and interview with Steven Spielberg on the making of Duel. But I think a lot of people, when they hear Steven Spielberg, they would think of the movie Jaws. But I don't think many people would know that Duel was actually Spielberg's first movie that he did. And I remember Spielberg even said that when he first pitched the idea to Universal, that they gave him a lot of hell over it because they were telling him what they wanted him to do was go out and film footage out in the desert, then come back and do everything in the soundstage. And Spielberg wanted to do everything on location, and he even told Universal doing it on a soundstage isn't going to work because you're going to have the guy in the car is going to turn one way, and then the screen in the background is going to move the other way. It's just not going to look right. So I guess after a bit of arguing, Universal did tell Spielberg, like, fine, you can go out and film on location, but I think they only gave him like 10 days to film everything, which in the end he ended up going over that limit, but they let him continue filming on location just because they were impressed with what he was getting. So something to mention about the truck is that apparently during production, 3 different trucks were used for Duel, the first being a 1955 Peterbilt 281. Now, this was the original Duel truck and the one that would later meet its fate going over the cliff. But supposedly during production, they also brought in a second 281 to be a backup for the original, mainly because this one was kind of on its last leg to begin with, and I guess they even had trouble getting it up to speed in some shots. But when Spielberg wanted to send Duel to theaters overseas, the movie had to be a set length and time, and in order to achieve that, they had to film additional footage. Now, when they did that, they actually substituted the 281 for a 1964 Peterbilt 351, which, while the 281 and the 351 look alike, they are in no way identical, and once you start to scrutinize the two trucks closely, you begin to see the differences. But that being said, I wanted to replicate my model after the original Duel truck, and I had quite a bit of time into referencing the movie and looking at screenshots to figure out what I wanted for this. And when it comes to this model, the first thing I'll say is that the 281 and the tanker are not available in 1/64 scale, or at least they weren't at the time that I did this. And you're probably thinking to yourselves, well, if that's the case, why is it sitting in front of you right now? That's because I sourced a few trucks just to make this one. And starting with the rig itself, this actually started out as a Peterbilt 260. I took the cab from the 260, cut the fenders away from the die-cast frame, and then I sourced a DCP frame to replace the original. Now, I went with DCP, one, because it was the correct length. I have no idea what this is off of, whether it's a Peterbilt, Kenworth, Volvo, whatever. But also, I chose this frame because I had the working suspension and the working steering, so that's something I really liked about it. But going back to the cab of the 260, I had to remove the original grille, and I had to grind and file down some details that were on the 260 cab. Now, I didn't really have to do a lot when it came to filling in where I ground things off and, sanding putty and what have you, because if the truck had a rough finish, that was fine. It was meant to have a used and abused look to it. But once I got that taken care of, I went ahead and fitted the cab to the frame, or mainly just made adjustments so the cab would sit on the frame. And then I had to look into making some custom parts for this. And the first thing would have been the grill. I actually made this out of styrene sheet and then used paper clips for the grating on the front. The bumper was also made out of styrene, and the minecart track here, that was made from cutting strips of styrene and then using paper clip for the rods in between. I remember I had a couple failed attempts on that until I got it correct. But when it comes to the lights, these are made out of, what would you call them, tubes or straws that you'd get with a model car that sits on a display stand and the screws run up through them. I cut those to size and then used some putty on the back to give them that round look, and then just went ahead and stuck them to the side of the grill. That's also how I made the air cleaners. These are made out of more of those tubes, I guess. This one is, the what I'll call the vertical one on that side, and then the one on this side, you can see it's horizontal. I used a screw for the top here, and then some copper tubing to make the pipe on the side. And I'm thinking, nope, air conditioner on the back here. This is made out of styrene sheeting glued together and then carefully cut and sanded into a box shape, and I thought that turned out pretty good. But other pieces like the steps, the fuel tanks, mirrors, those are all sourced from DCP. Same with the horn. That's a modified Kenworth or Peterbilt horn. I got one that looks more accurate, but I'm a little reluctant to swap this one out because I'm afraid of wrecking something. But this mirror on the front here, this is also a DCP mirror, just cut off the bottom of one of these. And for those that may be wondering what this second mirror, or this mirror on the grill is for, it was basically so truckers could see how clean their exhaust was burning, which, if you've seen the movie Duel, this truck clearly had problems burning its fuel. But I'm guessing the last thing about this truck, well, aside from the paintwork, I guess, is I just went ahead and gave this a coat of brown and then used a dry brush technique to dirty it up and just make it, give it that look of neglect. But I think the license plates on this have to be what I'm most proud of. And I remember I had a whole day just into making these. I did these all in Photoshop. They 100% accurately reflect the ones from the movie. Sorry about that, folks. My camera ran out of memory. But like I was saying with these plates, though, you got to be careful what truck you reference in the movie because the plates vary depending on which truck you're looking at. But again, what I did here was I replicated the plates that were on the original truck. And of course, I've also got the actual plate for the truck down here under the bumper where it was. And I remember Spielberg even said these license plates, the trucker's supposed to be a serial killer. And these plates are basically from cars of other drivers that he's either run off the road or killed in other states. In a way, these, as Spielberg said, were basically like the notches in the trucker's Colt 45, if you know what that means. So I was, again, really impressed with how these plates turned out. And like I said, there was a good day's work into making them. But I'm thinking that's pretty much everything I did with the rig itself. Now, the tank trailer required just as much, if not more work as the rig itself, because a lot of this underside detail was scratch built, a lot of around the back was scratch built, the tank body had to be cut and lengthened, and again, a lot of work to achieve this look. But this underside detail, this was all made from styrene, cut and glued together. A bit of a rough finish in spots, but that's okay because that's what I wanted. Around the back here, all this was added, made by styrene, because originally there was just a flat bumper on the back here. Like I mentioned, the tank body was cut and lengthened because it had to sit back behind the rear axle a little more than it did previously. And you'll also notice that underneath the trailer here, there's no jack. I could not find a good look at the jack that was on the trailer in the movie, so I just decided to leave it off for the time being. But these this underside detail here, I think there should be like cabinet doors and such. Those weren't added just because I just didn't have the right way of doing it to what I wanted, so they were left off. But another thing I did was there was detail on this top of the tanker here, this walkway or what have you. I ground that down and I added these filler caps. These were scratch made out of styrene, and I cannot remember how I made that circular shape on these. I'm guessing I probably roughly cut them out and then used a Dremel to make them round, but yeah, that's those. The ladder on the front is probably what I'm most disappointed about with this, if it'll get in focus. That's done with paperclip, I believe, or maybe I used brass rod, but it just looks really rough and not as good as it could be. I mean, I know the rest of the truck's supposed to, you know, have that rough, used and neglected look to it, but I just don't feel like the ladder, you know, fits in with it. But when it came to the painting on this, basically the same as the truck. I painted it brown, then used the dry brush technique for the weathering. This silver streaking you see, I guess this is supposed to look like parts of the tanker that didn't rust because you had all the fuel overflowing down the side. This, I remember I actually used a cotton swab, dipped in a little bit of silver paint, and just carefully went down the side. And I don't know, I think that turned out pretty good. But when it comes to the decals on this tanker, these are actually water slides, and I hadn't been making my own decals at the time, so I actually commissioned these from somebody. But you can see I got these ones as well as this one on the back. I also, the license plate and the number here, those are the same as what's on the front of the rig there. I made those myself. But other than the decals and what have you, I think that's basically it for this trailer. And I just think this truck turned out really good, especially considering what I had to work with, what I had to start with. And yeah, I mean, overall, I was impressed with it myself. Now, if my memory is correct, I built the Valiant about a year after I built the truck, and this was a simpler build, but it was another model that was not available in 1/64 scale. And it wasn't until a friend of mine suggested that I use the Valiant's cousin, the Dodge Dart, as a basis that I decided to tackle this project. And I was able to find a Dodge Dart by Hot Wheels, and after taking the car apart, I went ahead and cut it in half. Now, I probably didn't need to do that. Probably could have left it as is. But I did go ahead and fill in the 2 doors on the side and then Dremeled in 4 doors so it looked correct. And after putting the car back together, I went ahead and put in these pillars on the side. Now, there was also a hood scoop on the Dart that I had to go ahead and cut off, and I ended up patching with styrene and spot putty. And I believe after that, this car was basically ready for paint. So when it came to painting this, I went ahead and used an apple red color. And I remember Steven Spielberg was really specific. He didn't care what car was in the movie, but he wanted the car to be red so it would stand out amongst the desert landscape. Although when you watch Duel, you'll notice that the car looks more orange than red, probably more so to do with lighting. But once I got the car painted in that apple red color, I went back through and painted the trim all around. I know this looks a little rough. This was all done by hand, but I mean, freehand, I don't think it looks too bad. And another thing was I actually had to lower the car somewhat. Not exactly sure what I did here because I noticed I installed a new piece of tubing underneath the car here, but it looks like I installed another one above the frame here. So not sure what the deal is with that. I'm guessing because I noticed the car sits higher at the front. I believe that's how it looked in the movie. I may be wrong. But the wheels, I actually sourced these from M2 machines. I had a friend of mine had some spares, and he went ahead and sent them over to me. And I don't even think he charged me for them, so that was really nice of him. And another thing was I painted the interior tan to match the interior of the Valiant in the movie. And the last thing was the correct plates. Now, unfortunately, these plates did not turn out as good as the ones on the truck, so I don't know, maybe in future I will redo these. But considering this was built from a dart, I'm quite impressed with the results. And as you can see here, once I take these two customs and put them together on one of my displays, they look really sharp, although I don't think Percy is really interested in playing Demolition Derby today. So that's going to wrap up looking at my custom Peterbilt 281 and Plymouth Valiant from Duel. Like I said before, I'm really impressed with these customs and really proud of them just because of all the work I put into them. And I believe I built these back in, I think, 2014, 2015. So it's been quite a few years now. And I don't know. I feel like I've come a long way with customizing since then. But these seem to be some of the better customs I did back then. And although I am proud with all the work that I put into these scratch building parts and everything, these days you can actually buy a cab and tanker from Shapeways that are 3D printed. And I mean, a lot less work into those. I don't know, scratch building things to the extent I have here may be a thing of the past when compared to 3D printing that's available today. But I don't know. Like I said, personally, I'm still proud of these two, and they're definitely coveted pieces in my collection. But that's going to be it for now. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on these customs in the comments down below, and I'll be back with another movie custom in the next Plowbenders Custom Creations. Just a little something fun for those of you that made it to the end of the video. But in a fit of road rage, who do you think would win? Rusty Nail from Joyride or the truck driver from Duel? I mean, I think some of us probably know how cruel and brutal Rusty Nail can be, but at the same time, you really don't know what the truck driver from Duel is capable of. I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts, so leave them down below.